Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Political Vigilante. My name is Graham Elwood. You are watching on YouTube and listening on iTunes. And also, thank you to all the Patreon supporters who are backing the show and making it better. Speaking of which, Rodney J is a $5 and up Patreon backer, gets to submit a content and article. First of all, Rodney wanted to let me know that he's an Iraq vet and appreciates the videos I've done talking about what's going on with veterans. Rodney, thank you so much for serving and being a vet that's willing to speak up against this endless war machine, having served in it, and being honest with me in your email about how it's difficult for vets who've served in war zones to reintegrate into society, and that's never taken into consideration when we're talking about war. Of course, everybody wants to jump right into war with North Korea, and no one's taking into account how it's going to affect the men and women who will be actually fighting the war. Only the big corporation seems to look at the profit margin on that. So the article that Rodney J sent in was on Truth Against the Machine, written by Joshua Sager, about inmates trade time off for sentences for sterilization. This is insane. What is happening? Law enforcement officials in White County, Tennessee, have decided to implement a program to incentivize sterilization for inmates at a local jail in exchange for getting a vasectomy. That's a permanent procedure, or long-term birth control implant. Men and women incarcerated in the county jail can reduce their sentences by a month. Okay, so at first glance, you might go, well, hey, we shouldn't let hardened criminals reproduce and all that stuff. Okay, I get that. But eugenics, they've tried this a long time ago. I don't know that it necessarily works, that it's going to weed out the human gene pool, because there's always the controversy, or not that, but just the debate, there's the discussion of nurture versus nature. And, there's plenty of examples of people who grew up in a nice, loving, educated home with the best schools and everything like that. And the person still ended up being a drug addict or whatever because they got exposed to this, that, or the other thing. Or a lot of addicts, were abused as kids, and then they self-medicate as they were teenagers and got older with drugs and alcohol. So there's that example. There's the examples of people who grew up in really tough situations and got out of them. Now, obviously, if you grew up in a tough situation, it's harder. You have less opportunities. I firmly believe your surroundings play a big part. And if everyone around you is not caring about school and there's not opportunities around you, that can have a huge influence, obviously. But this is insane. Here's what the article goes into. It says, while the program is ostensibly voluntary, the simple fact that prisons have extraordinary power to compel inmates to participate in such voluntary programs, and for this reason inmates are often deemed unable to give informed consent for certain types of medical treatments. There's a presumption that they could be under duress, that this is unethical for medical professionals to conduct certain services on inmates that they could for free people. Currently, 70 inmates have been sterilized by medical personnel working for the Tennessee Department of Health, and there's no indication that this will stop anytime soon. Yeah, there's so many things. You're a prisoner, so you're under a lot of duress. Now, and if they're like, boy, we have a drug problem here, there's an opioid problem throughout the country, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's pretty severe here in Tennessee, as Rodney J reports, he said that the region by White County, Tennessee is rural, 97% white, and overwhelmingly supported Trump. I think it's safe to assume a lot of people who are implementing this policy are also opposed to abortion. That's a great debate. If you're opposed to abortion, then how is sterilization okay? I'm sure they're going to say, oh, conception, life begins at conception. That would be their argument, would be my guess. And the article goes into, as Rodney says, mentions that the judge who signed off on this wanted to reduce the number of children being born to drug addicts. Well, okay. I mean, that's great. His stance on the program eerily mimics those of 20th century eugenicists who sought to reduce the number of children born to such undesirables as the mentally retarded and habitual criminals. This is creepy. And again, oh, America. So we don't want to have kids born to drug addicts. That's a fine thing. Do we want to reduce? I mean, how have we been trying to reduce drug addiction in this country? We lock people up. And drug addiction is not a criminal issue. It's a health issue. Obviously, people on drugs, wanting drugs, commit and have committed awful acts of violence and all this other stuff. Of course, those people, when they commit those acts of violence, those should be prosecuted. But just the addict wanting to get high, that's a health issue. And why is our society so bleak and sick and wrong that no one wants to face it with sober eyes? What does that tell you? So why don't we address that problem first? Why don't we address the fact that addicts should be treated as a disease? If the American Medical Association calls alcoholism and drug addiction a disease, why don't we approach it as that? Versus locking people up and then sterilizing them so they can't have children. That just seems more of a crazy American thinking. And of course, well, gee, if we don't lock up all the people that are using drugs, then, oh, well, what's the private prison industry going to do? Of course, they're looking for criminals because it feeds their bottom line. Let's talk about some of the other problems with this program, as the article states. While discussing this type of compelled birth control, it is important to note that nothing I am saying applies to programs that provide sex education or improve the accessibility of birth control for inmates after they leave the custody of law enforcement. These programs can have real benefits when there is no hint of coercion or corrupt them. For example, many prisons' reentry programs include referrals to Medicaid offices. Oh, wow, treating someone with decency so that inmates have continued access to care, including birth control, extending from when they leave jail until they are resituated on the outside. Wow, so if we gave everybody access to good birth control and good reproductive health and good sex education. Again, we always just skip education and people getting access to good health care. We always just skip that and go right to locking them up and then sterilizing them, which is ridiculous. A moral solution to this terrible situation is simple. The program must end, but we must also need to implement a healthcare system where all Americans have access. All Americans have access to affordable reproductive services if they so choose to take advantages of them, free of coercion. This should start in school with sex education and continue through adulthood, where all adults should have access to birth control and STI testing. Additionally, all women should have access to gynecological services and screenings and abortion services. Amen. Thank you, Rodney J., for submitting this article, and it just sheds light. It's funny, like all of the problems, they're all the same themed. It's all just America missing it and wanting to treat the symptom, not the problem, and giving people access to education and health care. And, this is always like, this is, oh, wow, pie in the sky. We can't do that, but we can spend money to coerce inmates into getting sterilized. It's ridiculous. Thank you for making me and all of us aware of this, Rodney J. And all of you folks can go to the Patreon link that's below, patreon.com/Graham Elwood, and support the show.